Hey everyone, and welcome to today's webinar focused on discovering why being a disability confident organisation makes good business sense, and with a particular focus on supporting staff during times of change and remote working. During today's session, we'll delve into the benefits of putting disability confidence at the top of your organisation's agenda, as well as learning some best practice examples from our great guest speakers. And by the end of the session, you'll have a deeper understanding of the solutions required to create a truly inclusive working environment. We're really excited to welcome today's guest panelists. We have Rachel Billington, HR Senior Diversity and Inclusion Lead at the Metropolitan Police, Julie Dennis, Head of Diversity and Inclusion at ACAS, and our very own Louise McQuillan, Workplace Solutions Manager at Texthelp. I'll introduce the panelists in just a moment, but first off, some housekeeping. I'm Donna Thompson, and I'll be your host on behalf of Texthelp for today's session. Hopefully you're all connected to the webinar okay. You can hear my voice and you can see the slides. So if you're not familiar with the GoToWebinar software, you should see a little panel on the right-hand side of your screen that looks something like the one displayed on the slide now. In here, you can control your audio settings, and as an attendee, you're on listen-only mode, so that everyone attending can have a good listening experience. We do encourage you to ask questions though, whether it's about the material being presented or a technical issue that you may experience. You can submit them to us at any time throughout the presentation using the questions section on the GoToWebinar panel. We'll monitor this panel as we go along, and we'll switch our webcams on at the end of the session and answer as many of your questions as we can. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we will share the recording and the slides with you early next week. So one last thing from me before we get started. If you'd like to talk about today's session, or if you think of any questions after the session has finished, you can reach us on the Twitter hashtag you can see on the slide. That's hashtag disabilityconfidentwebinar. So let's introduce today's panelists and get on with the show. Rachel Billington is HR Senior Diversity and Inclusion Lead at the Met Police, and she's also Programme Manager for the Met Police Workplace Adjustments Redesign, where she has introduced the Disability Workplace Adjustment and Carers Passport. Rachel is also an experienced and highly qualified executive coach and mentor. Julie Dennis is Diversity and Inclusion Specialist with over 18 years experience. Having previously worked as Head of Diversity at the Land Registry, Julie is now Head of D&I at ACAS, where she's responsible for leading and providing expert advice on all diversity and inclusion related matters, with the aim of building an inclusive culture that drives engagement and ultimately performance. She also leads on employee health and well-being at ACAS. And Louise McQuillan, Workplace Solutions Manager at Texthelp. Louise specialises in helping public and private sector organisations to support workforce diversity and inclusion strategies, increase staff productivity and customer engagement. Welcome everyone, and thanks for taking part in today's Disability Confident webinar. So first up, we have Louise, who will highlight some of the challenges that people with neurodiversities are experiencing in our new ways of working, and talk about some of the solutions that Texthelp have to help overcome these challenges. So Louise, over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Donna, and thank you very much for the invitation to take part in today's webinar. Helping organisations all across the UK and Ireland to become more disability confident has been a key focus for me over the past number of years at Texthelp, and I'm more than happy to share some of my experiences with our listeners today. So before we dive in, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about why we at Texthelp have got involved in this important area. As a global software company committed to diversity and inclusion, it was pretty obvious that we should get involved in the Department of Work and Pensions Disability Confidence Scheme. If you haven't heard about it before, let me explain a little bit more. Disability Confident is a government scheme designed to encourage employers to recruit and retain disabled people and those with health conditions. It is voluntary and has been developed by employers and disabled people's representatives. There are 3 levels to the scheme. There is committed, employer and leader. Now, while we've been committed to the scheme for quite some time, we're now very proud to be a disability confident employer, which is level 2 of the scheme, and we're working really hard to become a disability confident leader, which is the highest scheme level. So it's great that we are invested in the scheme because disability inclusion has never been more important than it is now. As remote working becomes the new normal, it's great for many of us, but it's important to realise that staff with disabilities or neurodiverse conditions such as dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD and Asperger's may be finding this new way of working quite overwhelming, especially given how swift and unexpected the working environment had changed. So we work with thousands of organisations across the globe in supporting their staff with neurodiversities and hidden disabilities. And it's key that we do that because research suggests that 1 in 7 people are neurodiverse. So let's chat about some of the challenges these team members may be facing at the moment. So let's talk about anxiety first. People with neurodiverse conditions have been finding ways to cope with their conditions since their school days. They have coped with it, but they have probably been working at around 120% to get to where their colleagues get to every single day. So this additional pressure often manifests itself in depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. At a time when routines and working practices are changing, people will be feeling more anxious than ever. So next is time management. So many neurodiverse people struggle with time management. At the extreme, some experience a condition where time is perceived as sped up or slowed down. Some may even enter into a Zen-like state of flow, where they are intensely engaged and fully immersed in that activity. So very often we see the boundaries between work and home life becoming blurred, which then leads to stress and can lead to overworking. So planning and prioritising. When working remotely from your team, it is all too easy to lose track of what tasks are most critical and of business priority. People with dyspraxia can have difficulties with their sequencing skills. So this could manifest as making errors when inputting data, struggling with their timekeeping, or in planning tasks on a daily or weekly basis. Organisation can also be an issue. For example, employees with dyslexia may struggle with their short-term memory, which can make organisational tasks such as remembering instructions or meetings or managing their inbox more challenging. Many neurodiverse employees can also struggle with sensory overload. Background noise, bright lights, digital distractions are an issue in the office. And at a time when schools are closed and many working parents are trying to balance childcare, workplace often becomes more varied. And work itself is more varied than ever before. So these sensory challenges have the potential to be more of an issue when working from home. So people with dyslexia and dyspraxia can often suffer with poor working memory. So working memory is anything that you keep in your attention and work with at any one time. People with a poor working memory are more likely to forget things, go off on tangents, have random thoughts, and will often find it hard to concentrate on more than one thing at once. Frequent distractions, competing demands from projects, and pressure to work on a number of different tasks at once can all add to the problem. So processing speed. Employees with neurodiversity can at times have slower processing speeds than their colleagues, meaning they struggle to focus attention and visually scan and sequence information. So what can we do to make it easier for your neurodiverse team members? Well, I'm sure Julie's going to chat about this in more depth and share some advice and best practices that ACAS have been given to organisations at this time. But considering all of what has been discussed so far, I'd like to give a quick introduction to the support that we offer with Read and Write with organisations such as Network Rail, the DWP, Foreign Commonwealth Office and Met Police use in these times of change. Read and Write is used by 25 million people worldwide. It helps all staff work smarter, more efficiently and more accurately. But in particular, it benefits those with dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD and Asperger's. At a time when so many of you need to migrate to remote working practices, our tools can really help support your neurodiverse staff. And I want to run through just some of the key features that might be useful at this time. Don't forget, we'll be sharing the recording of the webinar with you afterwards, so you can easily share it with colleagues or team members who might benefit from learning more about read and write. So the first feature I want to show you today is our text-to-speech tool. So this is one of our most popular features, and what it does is it reads text aloud in a natural sounding voice. Hearing the written text spoken aloud can help auditory learners process information in an alternative way, rather than reading the information over and over again. For individuals who may struggle to understand written text, it can also provide that audio reinforcement, which helps develop their literacy and language skills. Along with the text-to-speech, you can also see our dual colour highlighting, which you can see on the screen now with the yellow and blue contrast colour. So this tool is designed to support individuals with dyslexia, as it can help with tracking and focusing on the text. When thinking about remote working, we had an organisation approach us recently looking for particular support with text-to-speech, as one of the challenges that they had faced with remote working is that people could no longer print off large documents to read and review. They wanted a text-to-speech tool so people could listen to the information aloud and create notes without having to stare at the computer screen all day. So that's just one of the ways that staff have had to adapt to their new way of working. Another feature that we offer is screen masking. So users can reduce glare from the screen and windows by selecting a screen tint colour of their choice to reduce the online clutter. So blocking or masking information on the screen enables users to focus on the text that they want to consume without distractions. It can also help ease eye strain and support those with colour or light sensitivity. So again, thinking about people in their new working environment, they may be working in a kitchen or a study with a very bright light. Using the screen masking can make it easier for them to process information through the day and helps ease the visual stress of looking at a screen all day. Our audio maker tool can instantly convert text into MP3 audio versions for offline listening. Highlighting the text you want to convert, hit the audio maker icon and follow the on-screen instructions. This can also help individuals create their own alternative formats of information. For neurodiverse users, Audio Maker can really help improve comprehension, focus, flow and working speed, as well as working memory and proofing work. There are benefits here for the wider team as well. So employees who want to keep active when working remotely, this tool helps them utilise time outside and away from their desk. It can convert text to MP3, and when you're on the move, listen to it at a time that suits you. Finally, the last tool I just want to highlight today is our Check It tool. So when teams are working remotely, written communication is more important than ever. Our spelling and grammar Check It tool ensures accurate internal and external communications. It helps staff with letter selection, word sounding information, and provides that executive function. Thinking again about people's new way of working, if you're jumping between meetings, perhaps trying to homeschool as well, the Check It tool is great because it can help you proof your work and pick up on errors that your standard Google or Word document may have missed, especially when you're trying to juggle so many responsibilities. So that really brings me to an end for my section today. It was a quick overview of some of the support that we're currently offering to organisations. So thank you very much for listening. At this stage, I'm going to pass back to Donna, who's going to introduce us to our next speaker. So thank you.
Thanks, Louise. That was a really interesting insight into the challenges that some of our colleagues could be facing as we all try and negotiate our new normal. So I'd like to hand over now to Julie Dennis, who is going to share some best practices for employers and offer some practical advice for those managing diverse remote teams. So Julie, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everybody. As Donna said, I'm Julie Dennis and I'm the Head of Diversity and Inclusion at ACAS. Just a little bit of info about ACAS for those of you who may not have heard about us. We're a government agency, and we provide free and impartial advice on all matters relating to employment law. Our advisors at ACAS have been extremely busy over the last 10 weeks developing a range of free advice on COVID-19, and that is available on our website, which is www.acas.org.uk. I'm also really proud to say that at ACAS we are now a disability confident leader. So we feel we're not only telling other people what best practice is, we're also practicing what we preach internally in ACAS. So moving on to my presentation. So first of all, I thought it'd be really useful to just give everyone an update on what the actual legislation says in terms of disability. And this slide takes a quote from what is classed as a disabled person under the Act. So the Equality Act makes it easier for a person to show that they are disabled and protected from disability discrimination. Under the Act, a person is disabled if they have a physical or mental impairment which has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day duties, which could include anything like using the telephone, reading the book, or using public transport. People do not lose their right to protection against discrimination because they have been able to control or correct their disability. For example, if they now have medical treatment or the use of aids. So the effect of the treatment must be disregarded, when assessing whether or not someone is disabled. I would like to note, though, that this provision does not apply to someone who wears glasses or contact lenses. People who have been disabled or had a disability in the past are also covered by the Act. So this is people who've got progressive conditions or anyone who's deemed to have a disability, such as those who have been diagnosed with HIV, cancer or multiple sclerosis. Babies and children under the age of 6 who have an impairment are also covered. And this is significantly important if we're looking at associative discrimination, so that parents of a child with an impairment are protected, even if the child's condition does not yet have a substantial adverse effect on the child's ability to carry out normal day-to-day duties. So when we talk about long-term, what do we mean? So in order to satisfy the Act, the disability must have either lasted at least 12 months, or be likely to last at least 12 months, or be likely to last for the rest of the person's lifetime if that is less than 12 months. The Act also covers people whose conditions may include periods of remission, and also the impairment may no longer have an adverse effect, but it's deemed to have an effect that will reoccur. And I think that's really important when we're looking at stuff around mental health. The Act also puts a duty on the employer to make reasonable adjustments for staff to help them overcome disadvantage resulting from impairment. And I'll talk about that in more detail shortly. The Act also includes protection from discrimination arising from disability. This states that it's discrimination to treat a disabled person unfavourably because of something connected to their disability. For example, a tendency to make spelling mistakes arising from dyslexia. This type of discrimination is unlawful where the employer or the person acting for the employer knows or could reasonably be expected to know that the person has a disability. Additionally, indirect discrimination also covers disabled people. So, for example, this means that a job applicant or an employee could claim that a particular rule or requirement that you have in place disadvantages with the same disability. Unless you could justify it, this would be unlawful. The Act also protects people from harassment and victimisation because of their disability. So what I'd like to talk about in a little bit more detail now is reasonable adjustments. So what is reasonable? So reasonable will depend on the situation, and as the slide says, the employer needs to carefully consider if the adjustment will remove or reduce the disadvantage? Is it practical to make? Is it affordable by the employer or business? Or could it harm the health and safety of others? What an employer must consider when making reasonable adjustments is actually to involve the disabled employee or applicant at that decision-making stage. They need to do that if they become aware of the individual's disability, if a disabled employee or job applicant actually asks for the adjustments to be made, if the individual is having difficulty with any part of their job, or if an employee's sickness record or delay in returning to work is linked with their disability. And in our experience, that's one of the most common times where an employer may suddenly become aware that someone has a disability. We would always also advise that there's 3 questions an employer could ask when considering in assessing what reasonable adjustments should be made. So question 1, does it need to change how things are done? So for example, if the employer's got a policy only to offer car parking spaces to senior managers, this could have an indirect impact on staff that have a mobility impairment and may need to park close to the office. Question 2, does it need to physically change the workplace? So for example, a clear glass door at the end of a workplace could prevent a hazard for someone who's visually impaired. So if the employer adds brightly coloured strips at eye level, it'll be more easier for the employer to see that. And again, I think we'd all agree that type of adjustment would help or benefit everybody, not just the individual who's visually impaired. And finally, does it need to provide any extra equipment or get someone to assist the disabled employee in this way? And for some organisations, Access to Work can help fund those adjustments, especially when we're looking at assistance for a disabled employee. So moving on to the next slide, taking all that into account, what are the things we need to consider during this current crisis? I think it's really important to note first is that we recognise that a lot of organisations have had to make some really quick and difficult decisions over the last 10 weeks. To protect yourself from discrimination claims, you need to make sure that you are doing the best by your employees and think about the equality impacts before you make a decision. This will make sure that you're not discriminating and will also reduce the impact your decisions will have on people with protected characteristics, for example, your disabled employees. I'll come back to that in more detail later. But when we're looking at things to consider, make sure you involve your employees in the decision-making process, and also that you're communicating in accessible ways to ensure your disabled employees can receive that information in a way that meets their needs. Set up working options in a way that does not disadvantage disabled employees. Make sure that people you're selecting for home working, reduced hours, furlough, etc. are based on business requirements. Don't make assumptions just because someone's got a disability that they may not want to be coming into the workplace. Think about the ways disabled people can work from home, and also think about their current or a different role that they may be able to do at the moment, and that's taken into account reasonable adjustments. So what about when we're looking at more neurodiverse conditions? So we've already heard from Louise that some people who are neurodivergent can experience increased anxiety when there's sudden change. And I think we'll all agree that what's been happening over the last few months has been a sudden change and an adjustment. So for example, it's going to be really challenging for someone who's neurodivergent to switch to home working when they'd normally travel to the office. The very fact that they've had to change their routine may cause a higher level of stress or anxiety than for others. It might well be that the support measures previously in place may not be available to help them alleviate these difficulties. For example, instant access to speak to someone at work. Working in an office, if we remember, means that you can actually see when someone's available. That's not always possible when you're doing remote working. So think about things that you can do to make that easier. It's also important to highlight as managers that you may well be managing an individual who has not declared or actually may not be aware that they're neurodivergent. So the best approach we would say at ACAS is to be flexible to meet the needs of staff. A change which makes the work environment or ability to carry out one's job work effectively is important to everybody. So just quickly looking at the bullet points on the slide, I think if we're looking at be willing to make adjustments, there may be a host of reasons why specific employees may have unexpected issues. The point of this is not to assume everyone will find it easy to adapt. It just may take some of us longer to do so. So it's important to find out what people need as early as possible before issues arise. Additionally, it's important to speak to individuals and ask them what they want. Remember, what may work for one person may not necessarily work for the other. So avoid making assumptions. When we're looking at training and forewarning, in some cases, extra time or support is required to get used to the digital setup or the social aspects of working from home. As soon as the need's been identified, the better, and it should be discussed as privately as possible with the individual. It may not be immediately obvious why someone has got an issue, but they do, and it needs to be resolved. So consider learning styles with any agreed supportive training. When we're looking at communication, making sure you keep it private is really key. And communication can come in different formats to ensure that an individual needs are met. Pass on information as timely and as objectively as possible. This is especially relevant with meeting agendas and documents for discussion. Essentially, arrangements or concerns should be discussed in a one-to-one basis rather than in a shared meeting. When we're looking at bringing specific attention or any relevant points to your remote working policy, use a checklist and agree expected rules of behaviour whilst working remotely and engaging in meetings. Make sure the guidance is reassuring and address individual specific concerns. So for example, making sure that you gain people's permission before you record any image or audio calls. I think one thing I just want to pick up is it's really important to consider if cameras are required and appropriate when we're having meetings. Not everybody is comfortable with using cameras. Not everyone is comfortable being on video. And I think that's not just about people who are neurodiverse. I think from a diversity point of view, we need to recognise that, you know, not all of us like to be be seen on the camera. We may be working in different work environments. So also make sure you make that clear with everybody on the call that it is not mandatory that videos are on. That way you'll not be excluding or treating your neurodiverse staff less favourably. Also make sure that you inform other participants when you're having a meeting if anyone's got an adjustment. Again, gain the person's permission before you have that to gain agreement. So finally, what I want to touch on is a bit around leadership, because I think leadership is really key while we're going through these challenging times. We're seeing vast changes in the world of work and it's really stressful. So it's more important than ever that we make sure we take time when making workplace decisions. So make sure you take time to catch up with your people. If your team member is happy, like I said earlier on, if they're happy to be on video, that's fine. But remember, not all people are. So make sure you're not excluding people. The benefit of being able to see people when we're having meetings will help you as a manager to see if there are any concerns. So that comes to my next point, in actually try to ask probing questions. For example, saying to that individual, you seem a bit different today. Or if you're really comfortable with this as a leader, actually first of all start the conversation by saying, I'm finding it quite difficult at the moment working from home. I've got my children here, they keep interrupting me. It makes you seem more human and it will put your member of staff more at ease when you're having those conversations. It's really important as well that you set clear guidelines and have regular reviews. We need to make sure or be aware that people are working in different ways. It's not like it's been in the past where we all go into an office environment or work in different environments. For some of us, we are juggling other things such as childcare, caring for loved ones, etc. But we still need to make sure that we set clear guidelines about what you're expecting from your people. And remember, that may be different for different individuals. So one side will not fit all. And again, take into account if you need to be making reasonable adjustments for your disabled staff. It's really important as well that you make sure that your people are taking regular breaks. So move away from your workspace during lunchtime and try to go to another place in your home if that is possible. And it's also important that you separate work from home. So make sure if you've got staff that are working from home that they put their laptop away at the end of the day and that they're not working through the night, unless they are doing different hours and are taking time off in the day. So it's about making sure individuals are only doing their contracted hours. The other thing I want to just touch on before I leave you today is it's really important that we think about health and well-being. So if you've got an employee assistance program in your organisation, or you've got mental health first aiders, make sure you raise that and make people aware in your organisations. Also, involve your trade unions if you've got that, or other employee voice within wider discussions when you're looking at interventions in relation to COVID-19. You need to also think about that not everybody is safe at home at the moment. That's not just around mental health, but we also are aware that there's been an increase in domestic abuse, and actually the National Domestic Abuse Helpline have seen an increase in over 25% in calls. So again, as a leader, making sure that you're signposting people to the right support. You're not expected to be an expert in every area, so signpost. Finally, remember, discrimination unfortunately is still happening. Employment law does still exist, along with the Equality Act. At ACAS, we are hearing our employers are not doing the right thing, especially not just around disability, but also around pregnancy and maternity too. So my key tip before I leave is, what would you normally do in a situation? If you have a member of staff who has a disability and requires a workplace adjustment to enable them to perform to their best, what would you normally do? And make sure you stick to that. Also, make sure you're keeping in touch with your people who are away from the office at the moment. That could be because they're on long-term sick or maternity leave or career breaks, or they're being furloughed. And finally, the Equality and Human Rights Commission have produced some excellent guidance to help employers avoid discriminatory decisions whilst going through COVID-19. And I'd strongly advise you all to look at that to make sure you avoid discrimination. Thank you.
Lovely, Julie, that's great. Some useful insights there, especially around supporting our managers and leaders in this time of change. You know, I think they all often get overlooked when we think about supporting our workforce. Okay, so I'd like to hand over now to our last speaker in the session, but by no means the least, Rachel Billington, who is going to talk about some of the great work the Met Police are doing to support their team members with disabilities. So Rachel, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Thanks to Lisa and Donna for inviting me to share our experience, and thanks to all those who've joined us. As we've said, I'm the HR Diversity Inclusion Lead at the Met, and I'm Programme Manager for the work we do on disability. And interesting, Julie just referenced there maternity. I'm also Programme Manager for the work we're doing for our Met Baby maternity and parenting support, and also our Women Returners programme. Thanks very much, Julie, for your presentation. I want to build on some of those really useful points you've shared there to offer some further tools to help you support your employees, or indeed yourself, be they people who do have neurodiversity or anyone with a disability or health condition. And remember, they may be visible, but they may not be as well. And I think at times as an employer, as a manager, as a leader, it can be quite overwhelming. And I'm hoping what you get from my input is a couple of tools that They're not easy. I won't necessarily pretend that they are, but that will help you structure some of those conversations that you will need to have. So in terms of what I'm going to talk about, I just thought I'd talk to you about the Met Police. Everybody knows the Met, of course. There's very few people who haven't heard of us, but very few people think of us as an actual employer. We're the largest and oldest police force in the UK, actually the oldest police force in the world, and we're bigger than the next 5 forces combined. So in the policing world, scale is a real challenge for us. We're the largest employer in London. We have over 45,000 employees who all have their different needs. 32,000 of those are police officers, but then there's over 10,000 police staff and our special constabulary as well. So in terms of what I'm going to cover for you on our agenda, I will ask you, if you can just move to the next slide, please, to first of all take stock and have a good hard look at yourselves in terms of disability inclusion. I'll then cover the tools to support that change, and specifically what I'm going to talk about is the work that we've done with passports and workplace or reasonable adjustments process redesign. And also I thought I'd share a few of our lessons learned as well. This is definitely a case study, and it's just a peep into the work that we've been doing for a long time at the Met. I think it's important to say this was obviously started pre-COVID, but what has really come out of the COVID experience is how versatile and flexible the tools that we put in to help disability have helped us through this difficult period, and particularly around that health and well-being support. That is actually dealt with by my other colleagues in HR, for example, in our occupational health unit. We've done a wealth of health and wellbeing support and webinars, and it's just helping improve the culture and helping us talk about what our needs are and what our conditions are. So I'll start first of all by talking about the best way of supporting disability through change. And I think the first thing I would ask you to do is answer honestly, and you don't necessarily need to share this, how disability confident is your organisation? Because, and the reason I say that is a few years ago at the Met, we definitely did that. We did not come from a good place in terms of how we were managing disability at the Met, and we knew we needed to get better. And I think, you know, in the current climate, in the week we're having at the moment, there's a lot of narrative around the fact that we all perhaps need to be brave and have a good hard look at ourselves. Are we really truly inclusive to all groups? And you know, today we're talking about disability, but that branches out into lots of different areas as well. So in terms of what we did, as I said at the Met, we had a good hard look at ourselves, and we appointed the Business Disability Forum to review our practice, who were extremely helpful. They did a systematic review of all our policies and procedures, and being really truthful, it made some difficult reading for us. We knew it would be quite difficult. There was some good practice that was noticed in there. For example, our external recruitment processes and the profile of our staff association were extremely good. But there were some real themes in terms of how long it took us to implement workplace adjustments. That was in the context of an increasing picture of employment tribunals and grievances, many of which were disability related, and took far too long to implement. Some of our employees were waiting over a month to have their adjustments implemented. Over 25% were waiting over 6 months, and sometimes that was for a really easy piece of kit, for example, that they just needed to be able to do their job properly and thrive in our workplace. The other theme that really came through was the lack of awareness in our managers and our employees about where to go for help. Many of our managers did not feel knowledgeable about our workplace adjustment process, and they did not know how to access information about it. So it wasn't necessarily that managers didn't want to help their staff, or we had a culture where people didn't want to support people with workplace adjustments. We didn't make it easy for them to navigate the system, and a system which is a large organisation at scale. And some of you who work for large organisations, that may well resonate with you. And I think the final point that I want to share, and again this is because of a willingness to share our lessons learned, is there was a perception in the workforce that there wasn't much senior commitment towards disability, and that it was almost the forgotten cousin of other minority groups, particularly, for example, ethnicity and gender, which were areas we wanted to work on as well. And they were things that we wanted to change, and we made a commitment to change. But that change doesn't come quick. You are turning a big ship around, and what we needed to do was prioritise what we wanted to work on first. And so to do that, one of the first things we introduced was adjustment passports, workplace adjustments, and carers passports, which I'll come on to now. Many of you listening will no doubt have passports already. We were certainly not the first to do this. But if you're starting out on your journey, they really are a great tool to allow your employees to express their needs, and also to help managers struggle with what might be called, by some people, a bit of a difficult, awkward conversation. Or perhaps you may have had passports for a while, but you introduced them a while back and they need a bit of a revamp or a refresh. They have really helped us through the COVID period. And if you haven't done anything with passports yet, I would definitely recommend it. Or if you have already, perhaps it's time to renew some of the comms around that. For those who aren't aware, workplace adjustment and carers passports, they're non-mandatory documents owned by the individual and shared with their line manager. And the whole point about them, it's designed to minimise those repeated discussions, particularly if there's a change of line manager. And common in policing, as in many other organisations, there's quite a lot of turnover in terms of either the individuals or their managers. And what we found was that many of our people with disabilities or health conditions were constantly having to repeat that conversation with new people and new managers. This stops that. In some organisations, it's a paper passport, and that's where the term comes from. For us, we've got an electronic technical version, and that means that it enables that conversation, and it's a different type of form as well. It allows for a spectrum of conditions, be they, for example, neurodiversity ones, to hidden disabilities and other long-term health conditions as well. They ask different questions. Many of our forms before this are quite formal in terms of their tone, and they have a tone of justification about them. This says different questions, things like, tell us what it's like for you on a good day. Tell us what your condition is like on a difficult day. And then there's free text there. There's no drop-down menu for an individual to just tell us how it is in their words. And that helps as well, because as we know with some of the conditions, there's a real spectrum. If we just take autism, for example, there's a real spectrum in what being autistic is like, and that helps that individual express what it's like for them. What's really interesting is, at the same time we introduce the carers passports, the idea about that is instead of telling us about your health condition, you're telling us about your caring requirements, be they for any type of dependents, for example, elderly relatives and things like that. They've been extremely helpful in COVID. And the surprising thing for us, since introducing them, the carers passport has had the highest completion rate when compared to the adjustment one. So it shows the demand there, and there's a need for that as well. And again, as described before, they really help their manager and the individual. There's still a fear about talking about disability in the workplace, I think it's fair to say, and it helps break down that fear on both sides, I think. So moving on to our second tool, the other piece of work we're doing, which is a huge project for us, but is part of our desire to make things better for those who need support, is all our speakers today, and particularly Julie, talked about the importance of reasonable adjustments. Actually implementing those adjustments in a spectrum where disability is far more complex now. It's not just about, for example, a piece of assistive technology. It can be wider than that as well. And it's really difficult sometimes to give and make sure people get what they need to thrive and work to the best of their ability. So what we are doing is, and many of you may already do this in your organisation, but we are introducing an expert hub for managers and individuals to deal with all things workplace adjustments, where we're coordinating multiple stakeholders and suppliers. When we first started looking into this issue and we picked up that stone about everybody who touched workplace adjustments, there are so many people involved, which meant that it was quite a clunky process to navigate, right through to, for example, our estates team, to our digital policing team, to occupational health. All these people have a really important role to play. And the idea of this hub is centralising that and coordinating that effectively. And the other idea and design principle behind it is to reduce the admin burden on line managers. I think as a result of austerity and withdrawing support for line managers, moving towards self-service, we noticed that actually we may have put too much pressure on our very busy line managers. And the idea is not to take away their responsibility to look after their staff at all, but wherever possible, the admin burden in terms of actually sourcing the adjustment, buying the adjustment, arranging for delivery, the central hub will take that away from them. And there'll also be tiered levels of support, and wherever possible, we're trying to move away from this idea of justifying why you need what can be quite a relatively inexpensive piece of kit from Currys that you can buy at the weekend, right through to obviously far more complex issues sometimes. But that we're looking at this as prescription, not justification. The team that we're working with closely there helped us develop that idea about this is what our people need, so why not just trust our people? We found that a lot of our policies are based on perhaps the 0.1% of people who might not abide by the rules, and instead let's switch that the other way to focus on those people who we should trust and are just trying to do their job to the best of their ability. And the other design principle around our new way of dealing with workplace adjustments is that they are standard. They're not exceptional. They're not just about disability. Many of us at some time will need some type of workplace adjustment, and that is to be expected, and we need to be able to respond to that as well. So just coming on now on the lessons learned through us doing this work, which by no way have we achieved yet. There's still a long way for us to go, and I don't think you should ever get complacent in terms of that. What's really come through, and I'm sure I don't need to tell many of you this, is the importance of a disability confident culture. You can have the best tools in the world, you can have the best passports, you can have the best workplace adjustments process. However, if they do not land in a culture where disability is both celebrated and included, then they will not take you very far. And that senior buy-in is extremely important. I told you before there was a perception that we didn't have as much commitment at senior level. We definitely do now. We have our assistant commissioner as our champion, and there's lots of people involved and supporting disability at a senior level. But I will also ask the question, do you have a sticky middle? And what I mean by that is the other lesson we learnt was actually that sometimes where the issue was actually more middle management and not necessarily their issue, but that point I was talking to you about before, where the issue seemed to stop there because they just didn't either have the time, the support, the training to help them support their staff. We've learned that the demand for passports is definitely there, and I told you about our carers passport being the high completion rates for that. The other lessons learned is we, from the outset, engaged and designed this with those directly affected by it. So if you have disability staff associations, if you have trade unions, if you're a small organisation, don't necessarily have that, please expose yourself and include the people who will use these tools in designing it. That really helped us land, and we've got excellent support by them as well. And the other point as well is the time is now. If you were ever going to make a change, actually, let's not look at the issues with COVID. Let's also look at what we can change. We've shown in such a small amount of time, we can change unrecognisably. We can adapt at pace, and yes, we can still be productive even working remotely. And one of those adjustments that we might need to use for people now, it may become far more standard to work remotely. And our next challenge is our adjustments therefore aren't just necessarily in the workplace that we used to know. There will now be a different description of what your workplace is. And the final point I would make is please celebrate your disability confidence. The photo that I think we just quickly had up there was that's our purple light up at New Scotland Yard. Don't be afraid to celebrate your confidence in this. As I touched on before, disability is often a forgotten member of the diversity family when we consider other areas of D&I. And more than ever now, I think we need to show we are allies across the board and that we'll stand alongside each other, irrelevant of what your difference is, and you can rely on our support. So do celebrate it when you're able to. Thanks everyone for listening. If you need anything further, I'm on LinkedIn, things like that. If you'd like to know a bit more, I'm more than happy to share that with you. Thank you.
Lovely, that's great. Thanks, Rachel. I really like what you said about the workplace adjustments being standard and not the exception, because, you know, we are all different and we have our own unique approaches to the way we work, and we really should embrace this diversity and put the right supports in place, because it's only then, when we remove the barriers, we can really reap the rewards of having innovative thinking and problem solving with a diverse team. Okay, so I think that really wraps up the presentations at this point. So what I'm going to do is have a look at the questions panel to see if any of our listeners have posted any questions while we were chatting. So at this stage, if the panelists would like to switch on their webcams, just to make this section feel a little bit more interactive, and I will take a look at the questions while you do that. Okay. Yeah, we've had some questions. So I'll maybe start with Rachel. There's one here specifically for yourself. It says, Rachel, how do you get senior support for disability as a priority in the current climate?
Fantastic question. I think we touched on it before. There's never been more of an important time to talk about diversity inclusion. I think if anything, we need to look, and I don't mean this rudely in any way, at the world outside there. It's not binary. We can see that the world is going on outside with COVID, with what's happening in America at the moment, and we can't be complacent. I always think, as well as that narrative and showing the importance of that, is to show how this links to business performance. And we all know that if we support our people to the best of their ability, it will allow them to thrive and perform better. So you know in your organisations the best way of selling that message. But I often find with senior leaders, as well as the importance of doing the right thing, which I'm lucky in policing, we don't need to be reminded of that. And it's very rare we have to regularly have that conversation. But the whole business case about diversity and linking that to performance is as prevalent with disability as it is with any other area. And I would definitely recommend selling that.
Great, okay, great. Julie, there's a question here specifically for yourself. So it says, you mentioned in your presentation about ensuring we communicate in accessible ways to disabled employees. What methods of communication would you recommend? Oh, Julie, I think you're muted.
I have. I've just spotted it, flashed up and said,
good on you.
Apologies for that. So I'd say
Okay.
the first thing is actually ask the individual, what is the best way I can communicate with you? Don't make those assumptions. And we've seen, especially in Louise's presentation, there's quite a few ways that we can communicate more effectively. But I think my first thing would be ask the individual to see how they would be communicated with first before you actually go down the route and then you find out that they don't want you to communicate with them in that way.
Great, okay. There's another one specifically for yourself, Julie, here, just when we have you. How can we make sure our staff don't overwork and risk burnout when they're working in isolation at home?
That's a really good question, Donna, actually. So I think, and I want to tackle it in two ways. So I think for all of us, it is really important that we don't overwork ourselves. And I think a lot of us that are working from home at the minute, it's really easy to do that. You know, and you can be working away and the next thing you look and you see it's like 8 o'clock at night and you've been working from whatever time in the morning. So I think it's have a real good structure, take regular breaks. If you are able to, get some outside space, get some fresh air. You know, I know a lot of us, I've been hearing a lot of conversations about how we're not getting as fit as we want to, and that some of us are getting a little bit wider and finding some of our clothes a bit tighter. So actually going out and exercising is not only good for our fitness in terms of physically, it's also good for us mentally. The other thing I just want to touch on is, I've talked about leaders, and I think it's really important as leaders we look after ourselves. And what I talk about is, it's like the oxygen mask scenario. You would not help someone without putting your oxygen mask on first, and it's really important as leaders we do that. We look after our well-being, we look after our mental health. We are not superhumans. We may think we are, we may be taking on more than normal at the minute because we're trying to help everyone, but looking after yourself is really, really key at this time. And don't be frightened to say I need help. Don't be frightened to say I don't know. I talked about mental health first aiders earlier on, and a lot of times we think about they're just there for our staff. They're there for you as leaders as well, not just for your own health and well-being, but if you've got a question about a member of staff, you can also talk to mental health first aiders or staff networks and people like that. They're not just for individuals from those protected characteristics.
Perfect. All right. Louise, there's a question about neurodiversities that you might be able to answer. So I'm almost sure I have people with neurodiversities in my team, and I want to be able to support them better. How can I raise this with them without causing any offence?
Yeah, I mean, that's the common sort of question we're asked a lot of the time. How can we start the conversation without causing offence? And I think Julie and Rachel both sort of talked on it there about it's creating that culture within the organisation. How disability confident are you? One of the great ways is starting the networks, having a place where people know they can go to and turn to for support. So it shouldn't be the individual chasing, to try and find the support. There should actually be multiple ways that they can get the support. And I think for a lot of individuals, particularly with neurodiversity, which can be hidden, it's trying to remove that stigma for them, that just because they're asking for help with one specific thing, that the support is there. And I think, looking now, especially with remote working, where everybody's way of working has changed, and I think it's really highlighted that everybody will need support in some way. So as an organisation, you need to be having those open conversations. And I know it's something certainly Texthelp have tried to do, when seeing what support people need in terms of even equipment. It can be something as small as that, which can make a big change. So really looking at what you as an organisation are doing to encourage that open conversation between everybody, not just the individuals who may specifically need support.
Great. Maybe come to you, Rachel, just touching on the support that Louise was talking about there. How do you manage this work alongside other D&I priorities?
Well, we have quite a robust governance and business plan in terms of our D&I strategy. And so we set right at the top by the Commissioner, has her own diversity board, and then that is further down into a subgroup, which is our delivery group, and that's where we agree our priorities in terms of what we are going to focus our efforts on with D&I. It's an ongoing challenge. I think demand always outstrips supply. But what's really important to us is to find this balance between our key priorities. So representation for us is always something we will want to look at, but also managing that through to create a really inclusive culture where people feel engaged. First of all, where people want to work. We're in a position at the moment where we have uplift and we're trying to recruit lots of police officers. So we want to be as attractive as possible. So what we try and do is weave D&I into our business as usual activity throughout HR and in other areas like operational delivery as well, rather than it being a standalone issue that one team looks at. So in terms of working out our priorities, what that allows us to do, and another example of that is we also have local diversity forums on each individual borough, and that allows people the gift to shape what they would like to focus on in their local area, which means that you're able to spread those priorities a lot wider. I'd always want more resources to do that wherever we could, it never stops, but it does mean we can give it a much broader perspective as well.
Oh, great. Okay. I think we'll end up just on a couple of questions that have come through specifically about read and write, Louise. So I'll direct those to you. so you said in your presentation that Read and Write has productivity benefits for everyone. Can you tell me more about what they are?
Yeah, so obviously I shared a snapshot of some of the support, but Read and Write as a toolbar really does support a range of different needs, and productivity being one of them. I mentioned obviously the text-to-speech feature now, which I think Julie had touched on. People are trying to get out and about a bit more, get their dedicated hour walking. What you can do is, with the audio maker, as I mentioned, create those audio formats, take that out with you and listen to, a large document, research you've been asked to do. So it's an alternative way of thinking. We have PDF tools there. Now more than ever, we're sharing information in sort of that written communication. But if you're staring at a screen all day, that can be very difficult. So with the PDF tool, that can help you process that information. We have a voice note tool as well. Everybody's so used to with the likes of WhatsApp and different messaging services using quick voice notes. We can now add those in with Read and Write as well. So loads of different features there that you can add in. And if anybody has any questions about more of the features or wanting to see a bit more of Read and Write in more detail, I'm happy to schedule time with anybody who's interested.
Great. Okay, one final question, Louise, about Read and Write. So someone is saying here that they used Read and Write in university and it was a great help. Is the workplace version much different?
No, it's providing exactly the same support. So we were obviously conscious as people were leaving education and going into the workplace. We wanted to offer that same support and that same consistency. So all the same features are available as well. So yeah, again, if they're interested in finding out more, happy to have a conversation with them.
Lovely. Okay, well, I think that just finishes us off. It's 2 o'clock. That's the last of the questions that have come through that I can see anyway, but if I've missed any, don't worry, we'll respond directly to you after the session. So I hope you all found the presentations useful and can take some of the practical advice into your own organisation to enhance your diversity and inclusion strategies. Special thanks to our panelists, Rachel Billington, Julie Dennis and Louise McQuillan, for sharing their vast knowledge and experience on this topic. So their contact details are on the screen now. If you'd like to reach out directly to them for more information on anything that they discussed. So that's it from us today. Thanks for listening and have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.